I had told myself for 2 years that Dr. Callum Reeve was just a colleague. I told myself that the morning they wheeled in the little girl who looked like my niece, and I told myself that at 3 a.m. when he sat down on the floor next to me and didn't say a word. I have stopped telling myself things. I've been thinking about this story for a while, about what it costs to be the strong one, and what it finally takes to let someone sit with you in the dark. If you've ever been the person who fixes everything and asks for nothing, this one is for you. Vanderbilt ER, Nashville, late November. I've worked this floor for 6 years, charge nurse for 3. I know every supply closet, every vending machine quirk, every attending's particular method of handling bad news, every nurse's tell when they're about to hit their wall. Night shift starts at 7 p.m. and ends when it ends, which is sometimes 7 a.m. and sometimes something worse. The overhead fluorescents in Bay 3 flickers slightly when the building's HVAC cycles. Nobody has fixed it in 6 years because there is always something more urgent to fix, and also because at 2 a.m. the flicker has a quality that is almost companionable, like the building is keeping you company. I know things like that. I know this floor the way you know a place you have decided is yours. I was very good at this job in a way that required me to be very good at not needing anything from it. Now let me tell you how it started. The first thing I knew about Callum Reeve was that he was good. Not good for an attending, not good considering the hours, just good in the clean, uncomplicating way that makes everything around someone easier. He transferred from a level 1 in Chicago 2 Octobers ago. He brought with him a coffee thermos the size of a regulation fire extinguisher, a duffel bag that looked like it had survived a deployment, and the habit of reading actual paperback novels in the break room between patients. In a building full of people scrolling phones, this made him look approximately 40 years older than everyone else, and, I noted without interest, slightly interesting. He said thank you to the techs after every trauma. Not a general thank you to the room, a specific one, by name, for the specific thing they'd done. Good catch on that line, Marcus. Thanks for being fast on the vent, Priya. He lowered his voice when delivering bad news to families, and he stayed in the room until families had run out of questions, even when the questions got repetitive and painful, which is not something you can train into someone and is not something everyone has. I noted all of this professionally. The vending machine on 3 had developed a new problem where it would accept your dollar bill and then reconsider. It would hold the dollar for a long considering moment and then return it with the energy of something that had thought better of the arrangement. This happened to approximately a dozen people per shift, including me, including Callum, including Dr. Torres, who once stood in front of it for 4 minutes, trying the same dollar 6 times with escalating personal investment. Callum figured out the workaround before anyone told him. You entered your code, waited for the interior light to blink twice, not once, twice, and then pressed the selection button again. He left a post-it note on the machine. It said, 2 blinks, don't panic. Below that, in smaller writing, it's testing you, hold firm. I noticed this without interest. I noticed it for approximately 4 days. There was also the matter of the break room. The break room had a specific ecosystem, certain chairs that belonged to certain people by unspoken mutual agreement, a coffee maker with a particular temperament that Renata had developed a relationship with over 7 years, a whiteboard that was nominally for shift notes but had accumulated over 3 years a series of aggressively passive-aggressive messages about dishes and an ongoing argument about whether rinsed counted as washed. Callum entered this ecosystem and navigated it with the specific ease of someone who had learned to read unwritten rules quickly. He chose the unclaimed chair by the window. He brought his own mug. He did not weigh in about the dishes. You've been charge nurse for how long? He asked me, about 3 weeks in. We were both in the break room at the same moment, which happened sometimes, the floor briefly manageable, and both of us having committed the same small optimism of taking 10 minutes. 3 years, I said. Did they tell you what you were signing up for, or did they just hand you the badge? Handed me the badge and said, figure it out. He looked at his coffee. That tracks, he said. I went back to my notes. He went back to Graham Greene. I noted, without interest, that he was easy to be in a room with. What I mean is, I had a system. The system had been built with care after my divorce 4 years ago, when I sat in my car in the parking lot of this same hospital for 40 minutes and understood something about myself that I hadn't been willing to understand before. I had a specific talent for being indispensable to people. I was good at making myself necessary, at knowing what someone needed before they asked, at being the person who handled the thing, at being reliable in the way that made other people's lives easier. I was very good at this. The problem was that I had spent 5 years being this for a person who had stopped being any version of it for me, and I had not noticed until the car, the parking lot, the 40 minutes. So, the system, useful, warm, competent, contained. The emergency department is the best possible environment for this approach to living. There is always a crisis. There is always something that needs fixing. The fixing is real, and the stakes are real, and at the end of the shift, the outcome is either better or it isn't, and either way you know, and then you drive home. I drove home fine. Callum started asking me things around month 3. Work things, at first. My read on a patient's family dynamics, whether I thought a particular intern was struggling or moving slowly, which attending I'd trust with a difficult presentation, and why. The kind of questions that are professional courtesy from a new attending to the charge nurse who has been there longer. Questions that said, I understand the hierarchy of actual knowledge here. I answered them. The answers were good because I paid attention to those things, and he listened to the answers, and then sometimes he came back later and said, you were right about the intern. I had a conversation with her. She's doing better. I noted this as professionally admirable. Following up. Not all of them followed up. Then somewhere around month 4 he asked me something else. It was after a shift that had been hard in the accumulating, unglamorous way. Not a single catastrophe, just a long series of problems that kept arriving before the previous ones were solved. The kind of shift that ends with everyone very tired and not sure why they feel like they lost when nothing technically went wrong. I was finishing my notes at the desk. Callum had been working through the end of his own charting. Most people had cleared out. Are you doing okay? He said. I looked up. He was looking at me, not in passing, not the reflexive checking in of someone moving through a room, actually looking. Yeah, I said. Fine. Long shift. He nodded, but he didn't look back at his chart immediately. He looked at me for one more beat. The specific beat of someone registering that fine is not an answer to the question they actually asked. Then, okay, he said, and went back to his notes. I thought about that exchange for 4 days. Not because it was unusual for someone to ask if I was okay. People asked. What was unusual was the beat. The beat said, I heard the fine. The beat said, I'm noting that fine is not what I asked. The beat said nothing else, didn't press, didn't perform concern, just noted, and then let it go. I couldn't remember the last time someone had done that, had actually clocked the difference between the question they asked and the answer they got, and let me see them clocking it, and then let me off the hook anyway. I filed this under things to not think about further. I thought about it further. After that, I was more careful. Not about the supply closet on 3. I was not giving up the supply closet on 3, which had been my private reset point for 2 years and had very good acoustics for the kind of breathing that is not quite crying and is not nothing either, but about everything else. I was careful about eye contact during trauma activations, where things got close and fast and the professional armor had gaps. I was careful about how long I stayed in the break room when he was there, which required a kind of internal negotiating that I found irritating because I did not need to be managing my break room time. I was careful about the warmth I could feel constructing itself in my chest around the words Callum Reeve, which was frankly embarrassing. The system held. It had been built for exactly this. There were close calls. The October night a medication order came through with an error that could have been genuinely bad. Wrong dosage, wrong patient weight used as the calculation base. He caught it. He came to me directly, quietly, before it had gone anywhere, and the way he handled it, the way he protected the nurse who'd made the error, the specific, careful, private way he said, "I think we want to flag this before it moves forward," rather than escalating it publicly. That was a close call. That was the kind of thing that makes you recalibrate what you know about a person. The November morning, we both ended up staying an hour past the end of shift because the transition had been rough and the day team was short. We were finishing the handoff notes in parallel, and somewhere in the middle of it he said, not looking up, "You're good at this job in the way that matters, you know?" I said, "Thanks." He said, "Not the managing up way, the actual way, the patients know someone's watching way." I said, "You should go home." "So should you," he said. We both stayed another 20 minutes. That was November. The supply closet continued to serve its function. Then one night in December, a Tuesday, slow, the quiet before the chaos of a holiday season that always came, he said, "You do the thing with the supply closet." We were at the nursing station, 2 a.m., charting in parallel. This had become a kind of routine without either of us deciding it. The station was mostly empty. The Bay 3 fluorescent was in the middle of one of its extended blinks. I stopped typing. "What thing?" I said. "When a shift goes badly, you go to the supply closet on the 3rd floor, the one by the stairwell that's never locked, and you come back about 15 minutes later, and you're fine." I looked at him. He was looking at his screen. "How do you know about that?" "I was looking for you after the Martinez case in February," he said, still not looking up. "You weren't on the floor. You weren't in the break room. I figured it out eventually. The Martinez case in February was 9 months ago. Why were you looking for me?" I said. He turned then and looked at me directly. "Because it was a hard case, and you were the one who'd been in that room the longest, and I wanted to make sure you were all right." There was a long pause. The Bay 3 fluorescent did its thing. "I was all right," I said. "I know," he said. "You came back fine. That's the pattern." He looked at me for another beat. "I'm just saying I know about the closet." He turned back to his screen. I turned back to mine. We didn't speak again for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I watched the clock on the monitor do it. What I felt, what I did not say, did not file, did not process in any way that required acknowledging it, was something very close to being known, not analyzed, not figured out, just known. The difference between those two things is significant, and I had not thought about it in years. Here is what I understood about the 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. hours. The building changed, the shift changed, the people in it changed. The performance fell away the way it always does when enough time has passed and enough has happened and there isn't enough left over to maintain the version of yourself you present to the world during daylight. In those hours I knew who people actually were. I knew that Renabda, my best charge nurse and the person who had seen me through more bad shifts than I could count, brought 2 dinners to every overnight, one for herself and one in case, because she had learned through long experience that everyone forgot to eat, and she had decided to do something about this without making it a thing. I knew that Torres, the second-year attending who presented as relentlessly competent, cried in his car before difficult family conversations. He had told me this at 3 a.m. one March, when the shift had been bad enough that the pretending felt beside the point. I knew that the night pharmacist, whose name was Gerald and who had worked here for 14 years, kept a paperback crossword book in his coat pocket and did exactly 3 puzzles per shift as a self-regulation method. I knew that Callum Reeve, in the break room at 3 a.m., read Graham Greene novels with a pencil in hand and underlined things that interested him, and that the things that interested him tended to be sentences about the specific interior logic of people's choices. I had not intended to know this. I had come in for coffee. He had left the book open on the table while he refilled his thermos, and I had seen the underlining and the sentence he'd marked. He had the look of a man who has made a decision and has not yet acted on it, but who is comfortable with the waiting. I had gone back to the floor. I had not mentioned it. I had thought about it twice a day for a week. Renata had opinions. Renata expressed opinions through eyebrow movements and the strategic deployment of silence and the occasional use of very specific language that sounded neutral and was not. She had been performing a sustained one-woman commentary on the situation for approximately 6 weeks, which she delivered entirely in the break room and entirely in the window of time when it was just the two of us and she therefore could not be held to account. He asked me which coffee place I preferred. I told her one night. It was 3 a.m., the slow part of the shift, both of us eating crackers from the vending machine because neither of us had eaten real food since before our shift, and the crackers were what was available. For no reason. In the middle of a conversation about a patient transfer, Renata ate a cracker, and you said, I told him, and then he said good to know and went back to the chart. Good to know, she repeated. It was a normal thing to say. She opened a second cracker packet. Margot, can I ask you something? You're going to regardless. Has anyone asked you how you're actually doing lately? Not you good, not long shift, huh? Actually how you're doing, like the real answer matters. I looked at my crackers. You're asking right now. I'm asking right now, she agreed. But that's me. I'm asking about, in general, on a regular basis, someone who would stay for the answer even if it wasn't fine. I didn't say anything. She ate the last cracker. Tell me in the comments, she said. What? Something I heard on YouTube. Tell me in the comments. I get to every one. She shrugged. I've been watching a lot of romance stuff on there. It's either that or my sister's podcast about true crime, and I'm trying to take a break from murder. I laughed. It surprised me. You should laugh more, Renata said, standing up. You do this thing where you hold your face very still, and it makes you look like you're performing being fine. He doesn't do that, by the way. He just is what he is. You can tell the difference. She went back to the floor. I sat with my empty cracker wrapper and did not think about what she'd said. I was very committed to not thinking about it. I sat there for 3 more minutes not thinking about it and then went back to work. Before I tell you what happened next, if this story is getting under your skin, a like means the world to me, because here's where everything changes. December 3rd was a Sunday. The shift started normally. 2 traumas in the first 4 hours. A motorcycle accident, a fall from a ladder, both manageable, both resolved. A cardiac event in Bay 2 that went the way those go when everything goes right, which is to say it went well but used up something in everyone who was in the room for it. I ate half a granola bar standing at the nursing station at 10 p.m. and called it dinner because there wasn't time for anything else, and Renata saw me do it and made the face she makes when she is cataloging things to address later. At 12:47 a.m., they brought in a 7-year-old girl named Ella. Car accident on I-40. Her father had taken an exit ramp too fast on wet pavement. The car had gone into the barrier. He was shaken and bruised, and at that moment standing in the ambulance bay in the rain, not yet understanding what had happened, and Ella was on the gurney being moved fast through the ER doors, and she had dark hair and braids, which had come partially loose. She had a purple coat with a hood shaped like a bear. The ears were still attached, that particular soft, stuffed kind, one of them bent from where the paramedics had cut the coat from her in the field. She looked like my niece Cassie, not exactly like her, but the same age, the same size, the same dark braids, and the bear hood. Cassie had a coat like that, had in fact asked for a similar one 2 birthdays ago, and received it and worn it until the stuffing in the ears went flat. You wall off the part of your brain that makes that connection, and you work with the rest of it. The wall is real. I have built it with care over 6 years. I have trusted it in rooms that were worse than this room. I got through triage. I got through the initial assessment. I got the IV line in on the first attempt, which is not always how it goes with children, and I was professionally grateful for it. I did my job, and I was good at doing my job, and the wall held. Then her father came through the doors. He was still in his pajamas. Blue flannel, the kind with a faded pattern that had been washed past clarity. He had a university sweatshirt over them, the kind you wear around the house, soft and formless. Running shoes with no socks, because he had been asleep, and then he was not asleep, and then he was here, and somewhere in that sequence socks had not been a priority. He had the specific look of a man who has been moving so fast that fear hasn't caught up yet. He was still in the stage of motion and urgency. The fear was coming. You could see it waiting at the edge of him. He came through the door, and he looked around with the fast, scanning desperation of someone who does not know where to look. And then his eyes went to the trauma bay, and he saw the bare coat on the chair next to the bay entrance. We had cut it off her to get access. Someone had set it on the chair rather than the floor, which was the right call, the humane call. He crossed the room and picked it up and held it against his chest with both arms and stood there. I had to look away. Ella made it. She was in surgery by 2 a.m. and stable by 4 a.m., and her father had stopped shaking by the time we sent him upstairs to the surgical waiting floor. The outcome was good. By every measurable metric, the outcome was good, and I knew this, and I stood in the ambulance bay at 2:30 a.m. in the cold November rain, and I recited this to myself accurately, and I was not fine, not in a visible way. I was not crying in the ambulance bay. I was standing in the ambulance bay with my arms folded against the cold and breathing and performing the function of a person who had handled a hard shift and was taking a moment and was about to go back inside and would be fine by the time she got to the desk. This was the pattern. The pattern had always worked. I went back inside. I made it to the nursing station. I stood at the counter with both hands flat on the surface, not typing, not charting, just standing, and I breathed, and I waited for the architecture to reassemble itself the way it always did, the careful compartmentalization that had served me reliably for 6 years. Callum was at the far end of the corridor. I don't know how long he had been there. He was in his scrubs with his white coat on, standing still at the end of the hallway, and he was looking at me, not approaching, not calling out, just standing there with the particular stillness of someone who has noticed something and is deciding what to do about it. I looked away. I focused on the counter. I breathed. When I looked up again, he was gone from the end of the corridor. I told myself he had gone back to his patients. I told myself I had imagined the quality of his stillness. I told myself the architecture was reassembling, and I just needed another 2 minutes. I left the nursing station and went to the medication room on 2. Not the supply closet on 3. The medication room was closer, and I needed closer. I sat down on the floor with my back against the cabinet, and I breathed in the specific quiet of a room that was designed for function rather than comfort, and I waited. I was not crying. I want to be specific about this because it matters, because the specific thing that was happening was harder in some ways than crying and easier in others. I was completely still. The kind of still that is actually the opposite of fine, the kind where the movement of the surface has stopped, but underneath something is very close to giving way, the kind that requires the entire remaining apparatus of your composure to maintain, and if you move a single thing the wrong way it will break, and you are not sure you can put it back. The overhead fluorescent in the medication room was the same harsh institutional white as everywhere else in this building, which is to say, completely uninterested in your situation. The floor was the standard pale gray-green linoleum that had been chosen by someone who cared about durability and not at all about ambiance. I had sat on this floor before, twice, in the 3 years I'd been charge nurse. Both times I had come back to the desk fine. I was working on fine. The door opened. I didn't look up. I heard the door, the specific weight of it, the particular way the mechanism sounds in this room, and I heard someone step in and register my presence. There was a pause, not the pause of someone deciding to leave, a different kind of pause. And then I heard something I did not expect, the sound of someone sitting down on a floor, not pulling a chair, not crouching down to my level with the posture of someone who intends to stand back up in 30 seconds, sitting down, all the way down, on the linoleum, back against the cabinet beside me, to my left, about 2 feet away, the deliberate, settled sound of someone who had decided this was where they were going to be for a while. I looked over. Callum was in his scrubs and his white coat, sitting on the floor with his arms resting on his bent knees and his head tipped back slightly against the cabinet, looking at the ceiling, not at me. Not performing, not looking at me, actually looking at the ceiling with the ease of someone who had found a reasonable place to rest and was resting there. He didn't say, "Are you okay?" He didn't say anything useful or therapeutic or designed to open a conversation. He said nothing. He sat on the hospital floor at 3 a.m. with the quality of a person who has nowhere else he'd rather be, and he looked at the ceiling. We stayed like that for a while. "Ella's going to be fine," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "She's in surgery, but they're confident. The attending up there is good. Her father is, he'll be okay." "I know," Callum said, still looking at the ceiling. Another pause. "She looked like my niece," I said. "I know," he said again, quietly. I looked at him. "How do you know that? You mentioned her." He turned his head and looked at me then, the first time he'd looked at me since he'd come in. Twice. Once when pediatrics sent down a birthday cake last month and you said Cassie just turned 7. Once in October when a patient's family reminded you of your sister. I had mentioned those things, in passing, in the middle of other conversations, the way you mention things that are peripheral, the kind of thing people file away or don't. "You remembered that," I said. "I pay attention to things you say." I looked back at the wall in front of us. It was a very neutral wall. It was exactly the right wall for this moment. I stopped, started again. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it tonight," he said. "I'm just sitting on this floor. That's the whole plan. I don't have a next step." He said it simply, with the ease of someone stating a plain fact, not a reassurance, not a move, just information. "This is what I am doing. Here is the scope of it. There is no agenda here you need to manage." I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. It came out shaky, which was embarrassing, and then it was out, and I felt marginally steadier, which was the thing I'd been working toward for 20 minutes. "I built a whole system," I said. "A reliable system for not—" I stopped. "I know," he said, and there was something in his voice that was close to warmth. "It's a very thorough system." "Thank you," I said, and my voice had gone slightly unsteady again in a completely different way. "I'm not asking you to take it apart," he said. "I'm just sitting on the floor next to you. That's different." Outside the door, the shift went on. Someone's radio crackled in the hallway. A call came over the intercom for a different bay, a different situation. The ER kept happening, the way it always did, indifferent to whatever was occurring in the medication room on 2. I didn't get up. We sat there for a long time, long enough that the shift outside the door kept going without us, which in an ER is a thing that can only happen for about 15 minutes before someone notices and needs something. But those 15 minutes existed, and we were in them. "Why did you come in here?" I said. "I was looking for you." He said it without any particular weight, the way you'd say a plain, true thing. "After the case, you weren't on the floor. You weren't in the break room. I checked the supply closet on 3. It was empty, so you checked here. I checked here." I sat with that for a moment. He had gone looking. He had checked the supply closet. He had known to check the supply closet because he'd worked that out in February, 9 months ago, when a case had been hard, and he had wanted to make sure I was all right. "You've been looking for me since February," I said, a beat. Before February, he said. I turned and looked at him. He was looking at the wall. His profile in the harsh fluorescent light it was not a romantic image, a hospital floor at 3 a.m. under fluorescent light. It was just a man sitting on a floor telling the truth. Callum, yeah, I have a whole system, I said again, and I could hear that what I was actually saying was, I am afraid of this. I am afraid of wanting something and being wrong about it. I know you do, he said. He turned and looked at me, direct, unhurried, the same quality he'd had in every exchange we'd ever had where he was saying something he meant. The system is good. The system works. I'm just sitting here. That's all I'm asking. You're not asking anything. No, he said, I'm not. That was the thing, wasn't it? That was the particular quality of it that I didn't have a category for, that the system had no file for. He wasn't asking. He wasn't waiting for me to produce a feeling on demand or confirm that I was fine or manage his experience of my not fineness. He was just sitting on the floor, present, unhurried, not asking. I don't know how to let people do this, I said. He knew what I meant. I could tell he knew what I meant because of the way he didn't ask for clarification. Do what? He said, but quietly, giving me the room to say it out loud. Sit with me, he nodded, like it was information he was receiving and storing, not a problem to solve. You're letting me now, he said. I didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. The Bay 3 fluorescent, audible even through the walls and down the corridor, did its slow blink cycle. Here is what did not happen. I did not cry. I did not fall apart. I did not confess anything else, or ask him anything, or resolve the situation in any clean narrative direction. What happened was that I sat on the floor of a medication room at 3 a.m., and someone sat next to me on the same floor, and I did not get up, and he did not leave, and the 15 minutes kept going until they became 20, and then 25, and then Renata's voice came over the radio at my hip, asking for a charge nurse at the desk, because a family had arrived for Bay 5, and I stood up. My knees protested. I had been sitting on hospital linoleum for the better part of half an hour. Callum stood up beside me. He picked up his white coat from where he'd dropped it on the floor next to him and put it back on. He looked at me with the expression of someone checking a fact. You good? Not are you okay? Are you good? The actual question. Getting there, I said, which was true. He nodded. Bay 5, he said. Bay 5, I said. We went back to the floor. Renata saw us come out of the medication room together. I know she saw us because she was at the nursing station when we came back to the floor, and she looked up, and she had the specific quality of someone who has noticed something and has decided, with great deliberateness, not to comment on it. Not yet. She raised her eyebrows, both of them, 2 millimeters, held for exactly 1 second, and then she went back to her chart. Don't, I said, passing the station. I didn't say anything, she said. Renata. Charting, she said, with great innocence, and tapped her keyboard with a kind of pointed serenity. I went to Bay 5. Callum went to his patients. The rest of the shift ran the way shifts run at 4 a.m. when the worst of the night has passed. Not easy, not quiet, but manageable. The kind of ordinary busyness that requires the hands and leaves the head partially free for other things. I charted. I checked in with my nurses. I managed the handoff prep for the day team with the systematic attention it required. At 5 a.m., Callum appeared at the nursing station with 2 coffees. He set one down next to my keyboard without comment, just placed it there and kept moving, didn't slow down, didn't look at me with an expression that required acknowledgement. The gesture was so matter-of-fact it almost passed as nothing. Almost. I looked at the coffee, then I picked it up. It was the right amount of anything in it. He had, at some point I couldn't identify, learned how I took my coffee. This was a thing I chose not to examine. Thank you, I said. Yep, he said, from 3 stations down, not looking up. Renata appeared at my elbow approximately 40 seconds later with the energy of someone who had been exercising great restraint and had used it up. "He knows how you take your coffee," she said, very quietly. "Go away, Renata. I'm just observing. Go observe somewhere else." "I think this is a medical workplace, and I work here," she said, and went back to her charting with the expression of a woman who had won something. At 6 a.m., with the day team starting to filter in, Renata stopped next to me one more time. She had the look of someone who had been thinking about what to say and had decided to say it. "My grandmother used to ask the same question at every single family dinner," she said, "every time. Didn't matter who was there or what was going on. She'd look around the table and say, 'Has anyone asked how you're actually doing today? Not fine, not tired but good, actually doing.'" Renata straightened a chart she didn't need to straighten. I think about that a lot. How much it changes things when someone asks the real question and then sits there waiting for the real answer. She walked away. I stood at the nursing station with my coffee and did not look down the hall to where Callum was finishing his notes. I looked at the whiteboard, which still had 3 days' worth of shift notes, and in the corner, the ongoing dishwashing argument, which had escalated to include a small drawn diagram of what rinsed looked like versus what washed looked like, with annotations. I thought about the real question. I thought about the floor of the medication room. I thought about sitting on that floor and not getting up, and what that meant, and what had shifted in the middle of it, without either of us naming it. Callum came past the station at 6:45 a.m., coat on, bag over his shoulder, heading out. He slowed. "Get some sleep," he said. "You too," I said. He looked at me for a beat, the same beat he'd used the first time he asked if I was okay, the beat that registered what he was actually seeing rather than what he was supposed to see. Then he nodded once and went. I finished my shift. I did the handoff. I got my coat. He texted at 8 a.m. I was on the interstate, 15 minutes from home, the Nashville skyline going past in the gray-pink light of an early December morning. The text said, "I have Saturday off." 4 words. That was it. I have Saturday off. I drove for another half-mile before I answered. The road was almost empty, the strange gift of the overnight shift, that you get the city to yourself in the early hours before it remembers to be busy. The sky had that particular quality of pre-winter dawn, pink-gray and very clear, the kind of morning that looks cold even through the windshield. I texted back, "I have Saturday off too." His response came in 40 seconds. "Good." I set the phone down on the passenger seat. I put both hands on the wheel. I looked at the road. Here is what was different about the drive home. I was not, for the first time in a very long time, running the shift back through my mind. I do this every drive home. The case I could have handled differently, the moment where I could have caught something faster, the family I should have checked in with one more time, the nurse who looked tired and needed to be watched. I run the whole shift back like an audit, looking for the things I missed. It is a habit that began as diligence and has become something else, something that takes up the space where rest should be. I was not doing that. I was thinking about a man who had sat down on a hospital floor because I was sitting on a hospital floor, who had memorized the things I said about my niece in passing, the kind of things people say and other people let go, who had come looking in February and before February and had known about the supply closet and had not said anything for 9 months, and then said it on a slow Tuesday in a way that managed to be both a revelation and completely without pressure. I was thinking about 4 words in 40 seconds. I was thinking about Saturday. The exit for my neighborhood came up. I took it. The streets were quiet, early morning residential quiet, the particular stillness of a neighborhood that hasn't started yet. I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine and sat there for a moment in the specific silence of a car that has stopped. I had a system. I had built it carefully after a long period of not having one in the parking lot of this same hospital 4 years ago when I understood something about the pattern I'd been in. The system was good. It had served its function. It had kept me functional and undamaged and fine for 4 years, and the fine had been real, as fine goes. I had not been pretending. I had been genuinely okay, in the particular way you're genuinely okay when you have chosen to make okay sufficient. The thing about that kind of okay, though, the thing about it is that you don't notice until something different shows up how much of your energy goes into the maintenance of it, into the careful management of the distance between yourself and anything that might be more than okay, into the supply closet on 3, the 15 minutes, the coming back fine, into the system. Someone had sat down on the floor next to me without being asked, without requiring anything, and I had not gotten up. I got out of the car. I went inside. I changed out of my scrubs. I lay down on my bed and looked at the ceiling, which was not as interesting as the medication room ceiling had been, and outside the window, the Nashville sky had gone from pink-gray to the proper gray-blue of winter morning, and somewhere down the street someone was already up and doing something ordinary, living their ordinary Saturday morning life, and I thought about Saturday, my Saturday, and I let myself think about it without immediately filing it under things to not think about further. That was different. That, right there, was different. Has anyone ever asked how you're actually doing, not fine, actually doing, and stayed for the answer? Tell me in the comments. I get to every one. If this story stayed with you, like it, share it, subscribe to The Lingering Heart, new stories every week. Until next time, may your heart linger in love.